Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
This recently came up again within a group of friends, so I decided that I would share it with more people. About 4 years ago, I started dating a girl that I met online named Kendra. We matched, she messaged me first, and we actually hit it off pretty quickly. We started officially dating after the third date, and everything seemed fine. She was pretty fun to be around, even if we were just chilling at home. She was very open about herself and her past, which was nice that she was open, but it also made me let my guard down at first. I kind of felt bad for her. She explained how she didn't have a good childhood as her mother was very abusive to her, and she didn't know her father, so she moved in with her boyfriend at that time when she was 16. She then explained how she got pregnant and her boyfriend didn't want the kid and suffocated their baby at like 2 months old. She seemed pretty happy, but obviously she had some issues, but definitely nothing that I thought was a deal breaker or anything. But then as the months went on, her stories became wilder and wilder. The stories she would tell me were so bizarre that they became hard to believe, especially when they were brought up in situations that would benefit her. Like, if I was planning on going somewhere with friends or family, she would make me feel about her childhood trauma and says that she doesn't want to be left alone. When I did suggest that she come along with me to take my dog to the park or something, she would decline, saying that she couldn't walk or stand long due to her condition. She claimed that she had some kind of infection in her leg that permanently damaged the muscle or bone, so she couldn't walk long distances. Yet, she's dragged me to her friends' parties where she stood and danced for hours. She also claimed that she had to dye her hair black. She was a natural blonde, but she had to dye her hair because the light color absorbed too much sunlight and it was giving her a brain tumor. She said this was directly from her doctor, that she could have surgery and have her head shaved, or she could just keep dyeing her hair. Look, I don't know why I stayed with her at that point, but I guess I just thought that maybe she still had things to work out from her childhood and that I could help her move on. I had no reason not to believe her about her family or her baby, so I guess I tried to just move past it. However, it did start to take its toll on me as she started having an excuse for literally everything. It was pretty obvious. When it was something that she wasn't interested in or wanted to do, she had an excuse. And when I would tell her that I was still going without her, something would happen to try and stop me. For example, every Wednesday, me and a few of my friends would gather for game night. We were all off on Thursday, so it was easier than on the weekends, and I never missed. I invited her to go, but she didn't want to. I told her then that I would call her when I left. She would call me halfway through, complaining that she wasn't feeling well and wanted me to pick something up for her, or that she needed me to take her to the ER because she had an accident like cutting her finger or something. Even when I was with her and friends, if I got into a conversation or we started having fun, she would be very dramatic and grab her leg or stomach or something, anything. And of course, everyone would turn and ask her if she was okay, so now the attention is on her. Illnesses were a common tactic with her. I started to learn pretty quickly who she really was. The whole time I was with her, she didn't even have a job. She pretty quickly started to leech onto me and my wallet, but I just ignored it, believing that I was in love. And when she didn't get her way, she threw a fit and we would make up in the form of me buying her something. I really started to put things together and grew more suspicious when she invited me to go with her and her sister to lunch and shopping. She thought of me as her bank account. Along with telling me that she was abused, she also claimed to be an only child. When I mentioned this to her, she became angry and wouldn't give me a straight answer other than I was obviously remembering wrong. I know for a fact that she told me she was an only child because she used the sob story many times that she had no one because it was just her and her abusive mom. So, being curious, I went with her to meet this mystery sister. And to my surprise, they looked very much alike. I have siblings too, and I know we all look similar, but they look like they could be twins. And that's because they were. The only real difference was her sister had a darker blonde hair color and a mole above her eyebrow. Listening to them talk about things made me feel like a lot of things Kendra had told me was a lie. There were things her sister would even bring up, and she would get upset and say that she didn't want to talk about it. I caught both of them looking over at me at times. So after that day, I went home with a lot of questions and really debated on how to bring them up. It turns out I wouldn't have to do much, as the next day, her sister sent me a message request on Facebook. She was kind, and it started as a nice to meet you kind of thing. But then after a few hours, she said she had some questions for me. She asked me if Kendra had mentioned their childhood to me, and I said yes. But after us both beating around the bush some more, it was finally revealed that she was never abused. In fact, Kendra was the abuser. They were actually twins and they had a younger sister. Kendra would constantly attack both of them, and as a teenager, she even hit her mom. Hell, her parents were married and her dad was even still alive. She was never kicked out, but rather went to a juvenile detention due to threatening her little sister with a knife, and she never had a kid. Her sister apologized as she knew that she was a habitual liar and wanted to know what all I knew or was told. I thanked her for being honest, and I took the rest of the day to really think about what to do. I finally got up the courage and I told her that we needed to talk, and I asked her if I could come over. I figured that it would be easier to leave her place than kicking her out of mine. So I went over and I told her that I wanted to talk to her about some things that she has told me, and I confronted her about her lies. I told her that her sister told me everything and I wanted to give her one last chance. I wanted to hear the truth from her, and I wanted to know why lie about any of it. But instead of coming clean, she just doubled down on the lies and tried saying that she was her half-sister and she was just trying to take me from her. Her sister even told me that she would probably try that too. I told her that I had enough and that we were done. If she couldn't be honest with me, it wasn't going to work out. I guess one thing that I didn't really take into consideration though was when her sister mentioned that Kendra was the abuser. So when I turned around to grab my jacket and leave, she started screaming and then ran towards me. She was jumping on my back. We went back and forth like this, of me struggling to get her off because she had her legs wrapped around me and had a tight grip on my hair with one hand while punching me in the head and shoulders with the other. I finally managed to throw myself backwards onto her kitchen floor where she let go. But before I could get to my feet, I was hit in the head and I was knocked out cold. The next thing I remember, there were cops and EMTs standing over me in her house, asking me a bunch of questions. And once they checked me out to make sure that I was okay to stand, I was placed in cuffs and put in the back of a squad car. After being taken back to the station, I was finally questioned and given the opportunity to explain my side of things. I told them why I was there, how I knew Kendra, what led to me being on the kitchen floor, but I didn't know how I got there. They asked me if I had physically harmed her at all, and I explained other than pretty much dropping her on the floor as well as myself, I hadn't touched her. And after a few hours, they finally let me go, but not before telling me how they got involved. Apparently, she hit me in the head with a meat tenderizer. So they told me that I should still go to the hospital to check if I had a concussion afterwards. Then, they were called by a neighbor as she was running up and down the street outside, screaming for help. She told them that I had barged into her place in a fit of rage after she broke up with me, and then I attacked her. They checked us both out and took pictures. And since I had multiple marks on my back, my head, my shoulders, and my face, and she had not a single scratch or bruise, they believed me. They suggested that I stay away from her though, and I promised them just that. I just went home and I talked to a few friends about what happened, and I even messaged her sister to let her know what she did. Kendra tried calling me a few times, but nope, all to voicemail for her. She stopped trying pretty quickly, thank God, and I just moved on, living to tell my crazy ex tale. Until this past Christmas, when she tried to add me on Facebook. That was an immediate block. My story starts back when I was 19 years old. As a lot of young girls do, I didn't have the best self-esteem, and I clung to people that showed interest in me, be it just platonic or romantic. This is when I met a man named Rich. He was about 12 years my senior, and at that time, I just saw him as a good friend. I was working at a local thrift store, and he came in there a few times, and in fact, I think I caused him to frequent there more often. He was always kind to me and seemed to actually care. He would ask how work was going and how my week had been. I was wanting to go to college, but I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to major in yet. When the store was slow, he even talked to me about what I was interested in and tried to help me find my way. I had never experienced this kind of attention, so I guess I was falling for it. It started as me just hanging out with him after work as friends. He had taken me out for dinner many times, and I even went to his house, as I was still living at my home. My parents had even met him, and why they never questioned their 19-year-old daughter hanging out with a 31-year-old was beyond me. But then, things turned romantic between us. I truly felt that I had found my prince and that we would have this happily ever after life. At the age of 20, less than a year after we met, I became pregnant. He even assured me that he would always be there to take care of the both of us. He welcomed me to move in with him officially, and even convinced me to quit my job, promising that we would financially be fine, and that way I could focus on being the best mom that I could to our child. Everything was going as he promised, too. The whole time that I was pregnant, we were in that honeymoon phase. He did everything for me. He went to all my appointments, he helped me when I was sick, and he even catered to my silly cravings. But then, when our daughter Adelaide was born, I fell in love all over again. Even after she arrived, we were doing great. We were both happy. She was healthy, and we learned how to be the best parents that we could together. We did have a few moments here or there, like when she would wake up throughout the night or when nothing we would do seemed to comfort her. But I thought that that was just the nervousness and stress of being a parent. My grandmother, though, has been my rock throughout my life, and she was on the speed dial at any time that I had concerns. Needless to say, she helped me through a lot. But things started slowly turning sour day by day, and it really broke me. It would start as Rich having to work late a lot, so I saw him less. And when he would come home, he seemed to be in a bad mood, or just really didn't want to talk about it. He was an electrical engineer, so I'm sure that it was stressful, as all jobs have their bad days. But he just never seemed to want to talk to me about it anymore. And then he would just call me to say that he wouldn't be home for dinner and not to stay up for him. Again, he would claim that it was work-related, but I had my doubts. And when he finally arrived at midnight or even later and passed out on the couch. But I had my doubts when he finally arrived at midnight or even later and passed out on the couch. In fact, I started seeing him less and less as a whole. I would see him off in the morning, but then that was about it. Even on the days that he was off or had an event to go to, he did not want to be around me. He stayed out, and he didn't have me go with him. He used to take me and Addie to his parents' place on occasion. But when I got ready to go once, he got mad at me for assuming and then left us there. It got to the point that the only time that I left the house was to get the mail or occasionally get groceries after nagging him about it being low. He failed to realize this because he was hardly home to eat with us. He became verbally abusive and mocked me when I tried to ask him for the simplest things or for any kind of intimacy from him. I craved our conversations, our silly inside jokes, or even just holding each other on the couch. I became severely reclusive and depressed. I hardly talked to my friends or family, and I certainly didn't get to go anywhere or do anything because I didn't even have my own money. Hell, I even tried talking to him about going to school so that I could help pay for things, and he wouldn't have it. He would shut it down every time, saying that it was too late for that now and that I was stupid for even considering it. As I mentioned earlier, the only thing other than my little girl that kept me going was my grandma. I talked to her about everything, and when I stopped calling her weekly, or seemed to want to talk very long, she surprised me with a visit and brought her homemade chicken casserole and some groceries. I broke down, and I told her what had been going on, and she told me that I needed to give him an ultimatum and stick to it. Rich was definitely verbally abusive but never physically so she definitely gave me the strength to do it. To wrap up the sob story, I guess, the ultimatum kind of did not go in my favor, or at least not how I would have wanted. He kicked me out. He told me that I was just ungrateful and that I could just leave. I tried talking to him about Addie, but that's when he dropped it on me that he couldn't care less about her as she didn't believe that she was his kid. He was my first serious relationship, and I was a virgin when I met him. Well, heartbroken me, I packed up the few things that I had that were important to me, and all of Addie's things, and then I moved in with my grandparents until I got back on my feet. Fast forward about 4 years, and I am still with my grandparents, but we are all happy. My grandfather had an accident, so I decided to stay to help my grandma take care of him. They loved spending time with Addie and watching her while I was in school. Yes, I finally started school and I was working part-time and I loved it. I was happy with my life, even as a single parent. Addie even started going to pre-K, and I would pick her up before I went to class in the evenings. Well, that's where things went downhill again. The school Addie was going to was very big on security, which is why I chose them. So when I got a call from them saying that someone that was not authorized tried to pick her up early, they called me immediately. Only my grandparents and sister were on the authorized pickup list. I left work and I went to the school when I saw cop cars around. I had to show ID and I had to be checked before they let me in. Little did I know that the cops were there because of me and Addie. The principal described the guy that attempted to get Addie, and when they refused to let them, saying that they would call me first to ask, they stormed out. That's when they called me, and shortly after, they had a lockdown as they saw the same guy walking the fence of the play area where the kids were about to be released from recess. And rightfully so, they feared that he may try to do something to the kids or even abduct Addie. As you may have guessed, it was Rich. I hadn't gotten as much as a phone call from him in years. And here he was, trying to take our kid from school, and our kid that he wanted nothing to do with. They had me identify him later that day as they caught him hanging around the school and had him in custody. After a lot of back and forth with him and the cops, it came down to him wanting a relationship with his daughter. Now, nearly 5 years later, he cares? I hated it. I felt like this was him trying to control me again, but once again, my grandma talked me through it and said to keep an open mind. There didn't need to be anything between us other than being parents to the same child, but if he's changed, maybe he can actually be a good father. So after a lot of lawyer talk, we worked out a supervised visitation. If I wasn't present, my sister and her husband were there. If he would try to take her from school, I didn't trust that he wouldn't try to take her if they were alone. And as expected, he used this time to try to get back with me. When that didn't work, he would become angry and then end the visitation. When my sister and brother-in-law went, he brought another girl with him and was too busy with her to pay attention to Addie. It was just an attempt to make me jealous, I guess. And one of the last times that I saw him, it was just me again, and when I finally put my foot down telling him that I was here for Addie and not him, and that I didn't want a relationship with him. He went in to kiss me, and when I pulled away, he slapped me, saying that it would be the biggest mistake that I've ever made and how I wasn't thinking about our daughter. I grabbed Addie, who had been playing alone at the park, and we left. I was ready to get a stern talking to for ending his visitation early, but I never got a call. This was obviously his main motive, as once again, I never heard from him. He stopped showing up to visitations, he wouldn't answer my calls, and even his lawyer gave me the whole "don't call me, I'll call you" line, and that was it. It's been 3 years since then, and I know it probably sounds bad and selfish, but I hope that I never hear from him again. Addie deserves to have a father in her life that cares for her, and not just as a way to get to me. And until then, my grandfather has filled that role really well, and I can't thank them enough. I just have that fear in the back of my mind that he's going to show up one day and attempt to take her again. I hope she's never in a position to allow that to happen. Back in 2017, I was in a pretty healthy relationship. Charlotte and I had been together for almost 3 years, and we were thinking about the future. We started looking at apartments together, and if things continued to go as well as they had been, I was going to save up to propose to her. However, even though a lot of the places we looked at were her choice, and she seemed so excited about this, she threw a huge curveball at me. She told me that she had a great career opportunity in Oregon. We lived in Missouri. At first I thought, okay, a cross-country move is a huge step, but I was willing to do it if it meant a better life for the both of us. And even if it was kind of scary, moving out of state could also be exciting. But much to my surprise, Her plans did not involve me. She said she wanted to make a life for herself out there first before she thought about a relationship. And before I could even recommend it, she shot down the long distance thing, saying that she couldn't guarantee that she wouldn't cheat. It really hurt, but at least she was honest. I didn't know how to feel though. I understand wanting to do what's best for your own good, but why even consider apartment searching? Why lead me on to believe that we had a future together? Overall, I was definitely upset and heartbroken, but I moved on, wishing her the best. But I wasn't the only one caught off guard by this. Even some of her family found it odd. I was actually pretty good friends with her younger brother, as that's how I met her, and he was telling me how their parents were shocked that she just left everything behind. They were worried that maybe something sinister was going on and forcing her to leave out of fear or something. But she assured everyone that that was not the case, and even showed us pictures of her new place and shared some links to the place that she was going to be working for. It was an illustration company. Well, knowing that she was at least okay, we tried talking to her here and there, but I think overall, it just made me feel worse, so we agreed that it was best to cut ties. Now, it's been several years since this event happened. I've entirely moved on and I'm happy. I decided to make some changes in my life too, and I got a new job. I met a girl named Valerie that worked at the same place as me, and I could instantly tell that there was a connection. We went on a date, hit it off immediately, and we had been together for about 4 years now. Charlotte wasn't even a thought in my mind. I was still good friends with her brother, but we hardly talked, but that was just life. So, needless to say, I wanted to propose to Valerie, and when I got hints from her and her friends, I took it as the go-ahead. Things definitely felt different, but in a good way compared to Charlotte. And to make it the second best day of my life, she said yes. At that point, life started moving pretty quickly. So when I was waiting in line to get coffee, I didn't notice the people around me until I heard my old nickname, making me look around. That's when I saw Charlotte. We hugged, and I asked her what she was doing here. She explained that she was thinking about moving back, but was just visiting for a week. We quickly caught up for a bit, and she suggested that we grab a coffee or lunch together sometime. I agreed. I gave her another hug, and then I left. I even went home and I told Val that I had run into her. We were very open with each other, and she knew of Charlotte, so she saw no issues with us catching up either. It was probably a few days after that we met up at the same place. We sat and talked about the past years. She showed me so many places of Oregon and places that she went to, and even a few famous people that she met through her work. So I asked her, since things were going so well, why she would want to move back there. Her answer was vague, but she said something about being able to work on her own time, and she wanted to be closer to her family. Then she turned the conversation on me, and I told her that I was engaged. She looked surprised, but also said that she was happy for me. As we continued to talk, I noticed her becoming more and more hands-on. She would touch my shoulder, going down my arm. She would grab my hands or even rub my leg with her foot. It was a weird feeling, to say the least. It reminded me of who she was when we were together. I mean, I didn't feel anything as I was in love with Val, but the thought was in the back of my head. Was she trying to do something? Was this her flirting? I tried not to think about it, and we parted after a few hours. When I saw Valerie that evening, I told her what happened and she really found it odd, and even thought maybe there was a hint of jealousy from Charlotte. Maybe, but otherwise, she wasn't worried about it. So, again, we moved forward with our life, and I got random casual messages from Charlotte. My phone number never changed after all. However, we started having strange events occur, and honestly, never really connected them at that time. Val ended up moving to another location under the same business that we worked for, so we were no longer riding together. However, I had to take her to work one day because she went to leave one morning and her tire was flat. But it wasn't like it just lost air or like there was a nail. I didn't even have to look for the cause. Towards the back side of the tire, there was a pretty big puncture in it. It wasn't a clear cut like a knife, but it wasn't mangled like the tire just exploded. Not to mention, there was no additional damage to the car either. We were just confused, but I just took her to work and I told her that I would take care of it. Val had a pretty new car. I went with her to test it out, and it was only a few years old at that time. But she ended up having a pretty scary issue with it. We kissed each other goodbye one morning and left for the day. When we got to work, we usually texted each other one more time saying, "Have a good day," with me usually being the first one as my drive was shorter by about 15 minutes. When I didn't get a text back, I thought that it was odd, but I just assumed that she forgot or someone stopped her on her way in, both of which have happened before. So after I got in and to my desk, I was prepared to text her when she called me hysterical. When I finally got her to calm down, she explained what happened. She said that she noticed her car hesitated a little when she shifted from reverse to drive, but ignored it as it soon went away. She thought maybe she just imagined it, but made a mental note to tell me about it when she got to work. However, she wouldn't make it to work because as she rolled up to a red light, her brakes kicked back and did nothing else. She went right through that intersection at about 30 miles per hour, instantly T-boning a van. Her airbag deployed and she was obviously shaken up. She told me the police were already there and the tow trucks were on their way, so I left immediately to be with her. The sight was pretty terrifying, and I felt so bad that she had to be in that situation and alone to boot. The van had a woman and her toddler in it, but both were in their seatbelts and the kid in their car seat, so they were okay as well, just a little bit shaken up. After the scene was cleaned up, we went home and she walked me through the situation again. It definitely sounded like something happened to the brakes, so after they towed the car back, I had someone come take a look at it to see if they could diagnose the issue. They were certainly able to, and they told us that the brake line had been cut, and it was obviously done by someone that wasn't trying to replace a line or done by accident. He said you could see where they tried to cut it in multiple spots until they finally got through. We were terrified and confused. Who would try to do this? Valerie was such a kind person, and it's not like she had any enemies that came to mind, so I didn't know how to handle this. But then, she asked me if I thought Charlotte would do something like that. I also didn't see Charlotte as the type to do that, and while we talked, it was still a very casual conversation. She wouldn't have known where we lived, and while I was questioning this, she brought something to my attention that she hadn't really told me about. She had gotten a few calls at work, like they were transferred to her office line specifically looking for her. But when she would answer, they would just hang up. She thought that it was weird, sure, but nothing scary or worth mentioning. Then a few days prior to the accident, she got another call, and this time, The person talked and said something with a slight giggle like, "Nice car you got," and then hung up. I was horrified. I didn't want to think about Charlotte possibly doing this or even entertain the idea. But then I remembered the way she acted when we met up. I couldn't rule it out. So I called her while Valerie was in the room so she could hear her voice. I played it off like I thought she called me and I was returning the call, so it didn't last long. But I could tell by the look on Valerie's face that it was the same voice. I was furious. Why would she try to do this? She was the one that left me behind, and now, almost a decade later, she wants to ruin my life? As mad as I was, I started coming up with a plan. I bought a camera, and I had it set up to face our driveway. Then, I texted Charlotte asking to go get coffee again. When she showed up, I was not friendly at all, like I was the first time. I asked her point blank if she was following or stalking my fiancé. She looked at me like I was crazy and denied it. But then when I mentioned her stupid phone calls, she had this stupid grin on her face and actually said that she was just trying to have a little fun. "But, she was pretty easy to track down," she said. She admitted to the calls, but would never fess up about the car. But after I chewed her out some, she started to show her true colors. She said that I was the one in the wrong. I was supposed to wait for her to come back and have a relationship with her again and her only. That was never the case. She broke up with me and she ended it because she obviously had plans to hook up with other people. Why did I have to wait around for her? I was supposed to be all alone those years? Hell no. I told her that she was crazy and she needed to leave us alone because we were happy and I would never, ever be with her again or want to talk to her again. And I left that place feeling much better already. I knew we wouldn't really be able to take legal action though unless we had proof. And that was why the camera came in. I had a feeling that she would try something again, and I was right. It was 3 or 4 days later when we checked the camera, as we do every time before we leave, and we were also sharing a car at the same time. There she was, clear as day, walking around and inspecting my car. She then proceeded to pour something in my gas tank, wiped off the side and the cover, prints I assume, and climbed on the hood and pulled her pants down and squatted. I'll let you fill in the rest. Charlotte has absolutely lost it. I have never seen this side of her, and I was frustrated and embarrassed that I ever let her back into my life. Sorry, this took so long, but to wrap it up, we pressed charges, filed restraining orders, and were able to sue her for the damages to my car, at least. And as we expected, we never heard from her again, and thankfully, her brother had no ill will towards me either. He said that she complained to him about me being engaged, and he basically told her to get over it, like I did, because I had to move on. I think exes are better left at that too. No friends, no contact, just old memories. Good or bad, I suppose. I have a story that I've been wanting to share with the world for a while. A story that really taught me a lesson about trusting people and made me realize that things can go really bad, really fast. I am going to add a bit of a trigger warning here, as this story does end in a horrifying way. This happened a while back when my high school ex-boyfriend, a guy we're going to call Christian, came back into my life after close to a decade of being out of touch. Back in high school, Christian and I were really close. He was probably the most connected relationship that I've ever had, if that makes any sense. He was actually the first guy that I got with, in multiple meanings of the word, and I thought that he and I had this really bright future planned out. In my head, we were going to get married, we were going to have kids, and we were going to grow old together. In reality, Christian didn't want more than a high school fling that he planned on cutting away from the minute he graduated. He ended up telling me as much only a quarter away from graduation. We were talking about the future, and when I asked if we were going to stay in state, he said that after May, there was no we. Well, needless to say, we broke up that day, and it crushed me. Fast forward around 8 or 9 years later, and I'm single, living my best life, and just doing whatever life brings my way, when out of the blue, I get a friend request on Facebook from a face that I hadn't thought about in ages. Christian. Being the nostalgic idiot that I am, I immediately went to accept it. But I hesitated when I thought about how our relationship ended. I sat on it for a couple hours, but eventually decided that we were both young, we both made mistakes, and it wasn't anything more than a friend request on Facebook. If he had grown up enough to seek me out and reconnect, then I could grow up enough to accept it. But what I didn't expect was that clicking that button was going to be the opening of my own personal Pandora's box. At first, everything was chill. We messaged back and forth, and it seemed like he really had his life together. After high school, he went out of state for college, and he had actually gotten married and had a son. I congratulated him for all that, saying that it was great to hear that he was doing well. But then, he told me that he and his wife had gotten a divorce, and she had done everything that she could to keep his son from him, so he was actually moving back in with his mom for a bit to get back on his feet. I apologized, and I told him that this was awful, and after a bit of talking more, he told me that he was actually in town, and we agreed to meet up for lunch the next day to just catch up. Now, nowhere in this conversation and nowhere in my mind was there any intentions of making this anything beyond just being friends. I didn't want anything beyond that. I just wanted a friend and wanted to meet up to catch up with him. When we met at the restaurant, I went in for a friendly hug, and when he hugged me, his hand wandered way too far down my back. I immediately pushed away and looked at him like, "Bro, what the hell?" He quickly apologized and said that he just got absorbed in the moment and didn't mean anything by it. I told him that this was his one warning and that if he tried anything else, this meeting was over, which I think caught him off guard. I think he expected me to be a bit more submissive, mostly because when I was young, I was way more willing to go along with things. But in the years since then, I've become a lot more self-sufficient and mentally sound, and I'm not the kind of person to take crap. I told him as much, and he nodded, saying all right, and continuing to apologize. The rest of the lunch went pretty normal. Nothing else happened, and I figured he knew his place. Of course, that was the wrong thing to believe. About 2 days later, I got a message from Christian on Facebook that said, "Thinking of you," with a picture of something that I genuinely did not expect nor want to see. The situation was very disappointing for multiple reasons, and I had told him that that was the end of it. I replied saying, "I told you that if you did anything like this again, that would be the end of it." He immediately said, "Oh my God, I'm sorry. That was for someone else, I swear." I messaged back saying that it was nice to see that he was doing well, but that this was the end of our conversations, and then I immediately blocked him. I'm not stupid. I knew what he was doing, and I wasn't going to be a rebound fling. Plus, he's not exactly the kind of person that I'm into anymore. After that, the situation with Christian went off the rails, and did so pretty quickly. One night, about 2 weeks later, I was out with some friends at a local bar, just trying to have a good time. And lo and behold, Christian showed up. He walked in and came straight over to us, acting like he was my best friend. The entire feel of the night changed immediately. My 3 friends all glanced at me like, "Who is this guy?" And Christian stood over me and smiled like everything was fine. I hit my limit the second that he put his hands on my shoulders and said, "How are you doing, babe?" I shoved my seat backwards to make sure that it made contact with him. I stood up, turned around and told him that I wasn't his babe and that he needed to leave me alone. He laughed and asked why I was being like this, and I went off on him. I told him that I had given him a chance to be my friend and nothing more, and he decided that he wanted to be a creep instead. I told him again to shove off and get the hell back out of my life. After a few minutes, he backed off and looked like he was about to cry and then just walked away. I kind of assumed that was going to be the end of it, that he would understand that I wanted nothing to do with him. Either that or the next encounter was going to end violently. And fortunately for me, it was more likely to be the latter. After Christian left, the whole night was ruined and we all decided to head home. I had driven my friend Michelle out that night. She had planned on drinking a bit more and I don't really drink, so I was her driver. When we left, she asked me who Christian was and I explained everything to her. And she told me that he sounded like a creep and then asked me if I wanted her to come over to my place and stay just in case. At first, I didn't think it was necessary, but after a bit of contemplation, I told her that it sounded like a good idea and that I would really appreciate it. I'm going to add a bit of a brief pause right there for the sake of anyone reading or listening to this. The next part of the story is the part that deserves the content warning. When we got to my apartment, and I unlocked and opened the door, and both myself and Michelle were surprised to see Christian sitting on my couch. Now, I know that a lot of these stories end with the ex standing there with a knife and attacking the person, but that's not actually how my story ended. Christian was sitting on my couch. He did have a knife, but he wasn't going to attack anyone. He had pretty clearly ended his own life right there. I was shocked, horrified, and I felt like I was going to throw up. Right there on my couch was my high school ex, a guy that I had just reconnected with and had to push back out of my life because he was being a creep, and he'd ended his own life in my apartment. I cannot overstate how traumatizing this was for me at that moment and every day since then. Obviously, we called the police, and when they and the medic showed up, they confirmed that he was beyond saving. I couldn't stay there after that. They had to treat it basically as a crime scene with what had happened, and I didn't want to stay there anyways. This was enough to get me out of my lease, thankfully, and I ended up moving in with Michelle in her apartment. I got rid of pretty much all my furniture as I couldn't bring myself to look at it and think about Christian. I've had nightmares about him since, about that whole moment opening my door, and to say that this whole thing has haunted me is an understatement. I'm not looking for pity, and I feel terrible for the fact that Christian felt that ending his own life was the best course of action. I'm just not really sure what else to say about all of it. Through all of this, coming to terms with the situation and moving my few things out, I did end up finding a note from Christian in my bedroom. He had placed it in the drawer of my nightstand. It was a simple note that just said, "Every mistake in my life has led me to this moment, and all I can say is that I'm sorry." It's not exactly closure, and not exactly something that helped me move on from it, and I don't know if I ever will get through it. One of my first jobs was working at a fast food place that, I'll just say, was famous for serving tacos. For what it's worth, it wasn't the worst thing, but I definitely wouldn't choose to go back. I had my share of ungrateful customers, unnecessary messes left behind by them, and so much more. But I've also had some weird customers that were memorable. We weren't often in a situation where we feared for our safety though, so I would just take a deep breath and then get ready for the next day. But there was one situation that often plays in my head when people bring up working in food. I was working the front on this day, taking orders and occasionally picking up the lobby when it was slow. We were open 24/7, and I picked up part of someone's shift, so I was going to be there till 2 in the morning. It was probably around 11 to midnight when a guy walked in. When you work overnight in fast food, you get used to the clientele you see around at that time. So, it didn't really catch me off guard at first when the guy looked a bit disheveled. He was a tall, average-built looking guy with thinning hair and a scruffy beard. He was wearing a dark hoodie and some pretty dirty sweatpants, but he was keeping his hands in his pockets. When he entered, he seemed like he was surveying the lobby, so between that and him keeping his hands hidden, it did kind of put me on guard. We had never been robbed before, but we did go through training on how to handle them if one were to occur. I was hoping that I was just being way too judgmental, and I still greeted him with a smile. I asked what I could get for him, and he just stared at the menu with his eyes glazed over. I kept looking around the area, in a worst-case scenario kind of way, to determine my escape routes or possibly weapons. I backed up a bit, trying to play it off like I was looking for something, when the guy finally spoke in a soft, calm voice. "I'm not gonna hurt you." After that, I definitely felt stupid. I felt bad for assuming this guy's intentions, and I tried to play it off like I was cool though. I said with a bit of a laugh something like, "What? Oh, nah, you're fine, man. I was just looking for the broom. Just let me know if you have any questions, okay? No rush." He didn't look down at me or move his eyes at all. He just continued to stare at the menu. I walked up to the side, bringing the broom to at least back up my story. When I came back, he talked a bit more in the same solemn tone that he had before. "I actually do have a question, or more so a favor." Yeah man, sure, what's up?" "Can you call the cops for me?" I didn't know what to say at this point, so I just stared for a minute and he kept talking, still looking up. He said, "I'm still not going to hurt you. I'm going to need a cop." I went to walk away to grab a phone and tell one of the others that worked there when he called me back over saying, "Hey, wait. I would like to order first before you call. You guys make the best quesadillas." Not really knowing what else to do other than what he asked, I then placed his order and he pulled out a wad of cash from his pocket with a shaking hand. I actually told him not to worry about it, and he thanked me and put it back in his pocket. He then walked over to a nearby table and sat down as he looked down at the table. After his order was done, I brought it over to him and he told me that I could go ahead and call the cops now, and then he began to eat his food. I then walked to the back and called the cops. That was a confusing call and they didn't seem to take me seriously at first either. I told them the only thing that I knew. I explained the guy's demeanor, what he looked like, and said that he seemed unarmed but asked me to call the cops and I had no idea why. They said that they would send a unit out though. And at this point, I had already told the two other people working that night what was going on, and one of them overheard part of it. We all stayed in the back trying to come up with things in our head as to why he may have done this too. When the cops did finally show up, the man stood up, threw away his trash, and before walking towards the cops, he walked back over to me and for the first time that night, he looked me in the eyes, shook my hand and thanked me. He then walked over to the cops and they walked out of the building. We all thought that it was weird, but just left it at that as nothing else happened. Well, that is until about an hour later, we had a different cop come in wanting to ask us more questions. He was asking very specifically what all the guys said and did, and if we even knew which way he came from. I didn't see him pull up or what he was driving, but there were no cars in the parking lot that night other than our own, so he could have walked there. All I remember was that he did not exist prior to opening the door, so I don't think we were much help. He then left again and heard nothing else of it. Well, it wasn't until a few days later when there was a story on TV that caught my attention. They were making light of it and mentioned something about murder making you hungry, or something to that effect. Anyways, they had mentioned that a man turned himself in after bludgeoning his father to death, but not before he stopped for dinner. I looked up more information on it and got some more clarification, but it certainly didn't make me feel any better about the situation. It showed the mugshot of the guy, which confirmed that it was the same one that came in that night. It was reported that he turned himself in after he had beaten his dad to death that night. He said that he knew he had to turn himself in, but he hadn't eaten and wanted one last meal of his choice. And based on the area that they listed for when this took place, this man probably walked about 4 miles to get to my exact store. I assumed he walked because again there were no cars in the parking lot. I just thought to myself, why? Why us? Why our store? But I guess he said that he did enjoy the food and our location would have been the closest one to him. The thought that I was talking to a man and gave him a free meal just hours after he killed someone terrified me and made me feel awful. Well, to be honest, it gave me mixed feelings. I was terrified and my first thought was that my first reaction that night was warranted. This guy could have easily hurt me too, but he didn't. But when I gave him the meal for free and when he shook my hand, he seemed genuinely thankful. And by the look in his eyes, I thought he had just one hell of a day, or maybe even life, and appreciated the generosity shown to him. I'm still not 100% sure on the details. I've looked around at different news articles, tried finding others that may have known the guy, but all I've ever found has been hearsay. I heard some people say that he was abused by his dad and just couldn't take it anymore. I heard he was using and may have snapped or hallucinated and then attacked him. I've heard some pretty wild things, but I can't say for sure. All I know is that after that experience, I appreciate life a bit more and understand just how fragile it is. This happened to me and my daughter several years ago. My daughter, Brooke, had recently gotten her permit and would come up with any reason to drive. I didn't hate it though, as she was always willing to run to the grocery store when I needed something for dinner or pick up her little brother from school, so it was definitely helpful. But being a parent, there was also that painful feeling knowing that she was growing up. But you're not here to listen to that story. Anyways, I had to run by the drugstore to pick up a prescription, and she wanted to drive, so I agreed. My husband was at my son's t-ball practice, so it was just going to be the two of us. I think this was partially to drive more, but after we left the drugstore, she said she wanted to stop by a local fast food place that had really good ice cream. She offered to buy it though, so I wasn't going to say no to free ice cream, and I agreed. We got there and decided to go in so that way she wasn't driving and trying to eat at the same time. She didn't need to already be driving with distractions anyways. We got in, placed our order and stood towards the back waiting for them to call it out. Once we got our ice cream, we went back and sat down and enjoyed our little treat and talked about her classes, her friends, about school, and other things. I typically ate mine slower, so since she finished before me, she said she was going to use the restroom before we left the store. After she walked away, I pulled out my phone to check the time and also text my husband. But it was just about that time that a guy walked in, and I immediately got a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. He probably had an average build, completely bald, and was wearing jeans and one of those brown-style jackets. He looked right at me with his piercing look and then quickly looked back towards the counter. It gave me a shiver down my spine, and all I could think about was that I needed to run. I gripped my phone, but before I could stand up, the guy pulled out a gun and then started shouting demands. It was like the room was in slow motion as I watched people scatter and try to run out of the doors. The employees were crouching and covering their heads, all while the poor girl that rang us up stood there frozen. The guy demanded the money in the register, and she immediately started pushing buttons, trying to get it to open. As the guy was shouting at her, I looked over to see the restroom door open. My daughter could see the people trying to take cover, and she looked very confused. I tried to communicate the best that I could without talking, shaking my head and trying to motion her to go back to the restroom. I was praying she would understand and just go back in and call 911. But as she stood there just as frozen, I really couldn't blame her. And fortunately, I was within sight of the guy and he noticed me motioning to her. This caused him to approach me and then hold the weapon in my face, which made my daughter yelp, and he looked at her. I immediately spoke up, as stupid as it may have been, but I pleaded with him to leave her alone as she was my 15-year-old daughter. He then looked back at me and demanded that I give him everything that I had. I opened my purse, and as I was pulling out my wallet, he snatched it from me. After he searched it and pulled out what he wanted, he motioned for me to go outside, which then caused my daughter to start crying. And before I could react, he looked at her and said that he wasn't going to hurt me, and again told me to go. As we started walking outside, he put the weapon in his pocket but kept it close to me, as I remember feeling him press it against my side. He said he wanted me to drive him somewhere, and I said that I would. However, when I approached my van, I realized that I didn't have my keys with me. They were still on my daughter. I tried to say something, but the words weren't quite coming out. I told him that I just remembered that I didn't have my keys, and he immediately became angry. It was obvious that he thought that I was lying, and he snatched my purse from me and proceeded to dump it out onto the parking lot. And after this, He became pretty furious and began punching my car door over and over and over again. I stood there, not knowing what to do now, when we both stopped to look up. I'm sure he heard the same thing that I heard. Faint sirens in the distance. He punched my door one more time before shouting something and then running off. I watched as he ran towards another nearby building and around the back of it. And once he was out of sight, I ran back inside where a lot of people were still covering themselves. Then I heard my daughter quietly call out for me. She had gone to one of the tables near the window and was watching us, I presume. I don't think we ever hugged as tight as we did at that moment. We all stayed pretty much like that until cops showed up and told us that we were okay. The guy did not get very far whatsoever, as he tried to take someone else's car and got caught in the process. We all explained what happened and what was all taken. He had taken the few bills that I had in my wallet, 3 credit cards, and my ID, and when they caught him, he had all the cards on him still, so I got those back. I was glad to not have to replace my ID, but even more grateful that no one was hurt. Traumatized, definitely, I'm sure. But we are so grateful that the gun was never fired. It was a terrifying moment for us, but I don't let it hold me back. It's been almost a decade since this happened, and my daughter has also moved past it too. She definitely struggled for a while, not wanting to leave my side when we were in public, and had some pretty mean nightmares, but she has become a very brave young lady. However, I hope we never have to experience something like that ever again. This was something that happened when I was driving across the state to visit and reconnect with an old friend of mine. I was going to be driving by myself, which I had only ever done one other time. This meant that I would have to keep myself entertained as I made the 9-hour drive. I packed myself plenty of snacks and drinks so I wouldn't have to stop, which worked out for most of the trip. However, towards the tail end of my drive, I started to really crave fries. I could tell that I was going to need some more caffeine anyways, so I decided to find a quick place to eat and refuel. I stopped at a fast food chain that was popular in the Midwest to grab something to eat and a soda. It wasn't busy when I arrived, but there were a few people sitting in the lobby eating, and I saw a few workers behind the counter as well. I approached as I normally do, greeting the person at the register, but I noticed immediately that they did not look to be in a good mood. In fact, they looked pretty irritated. I hope it wasn't because of me, so I just tried to be as nice as possible. I was also working retail at that time, so I completely understood how bad some days could be working with the public. The man at the counter quickly said in a hurried manner, "What can I get you?" So I started giving my order, and when he was repeating it, he stumbled over his words and then also said the wrong item. I politely corrected it, which made him look down, and then he started jamming buttons with his finger and then loudly sighed and apologized. I giggled slightly and told him that it wasn't a big deal, and trying to be nice, I told him that I appreciate him repeating back the order for reasons just like that. It's really amazing how far a little kindness can go. He then sighed again and then told me that he was just having a bad day. I apologized. I told him that it was okay though, and that we are all allowed to have bad days. Apparently, this was enough for him to give me a quick synopsis of everything that he was dealing with, which was definitely a lot for one person, and just tried to be polite. This all was happening while I paid and stood there with my receipt for a moment. After a few minutes and our conversation winding down, He said he appreciated me listening to him rant and that he would bring my food to me so I could go sit down. I said thank you and I went and found a seat. I sat at one of those bar tables with the stools that faced towards the parking lot with my back to the counter. Enough time passed for me to text my friend to let him know where I was at, and then respond to a few other texts when the same guy brought over a tray with my food. I thanked him and he walked away, so I began enjoying my meal. I was probably about halfway through when I heard a familiar voice approach my spot from the side and said hi to me. It was the same guy. He asked if he could sit with me for a moment as he was on a break. I really didn't think it was a little weird, but I wasn't going to be there much longer, so I told him that it was fine. And that's when the guy just unloaded. He was talking about how he was stressed because his car broke down. He thought that his girlfriend was going to leave him. His parents were pressuring him about his schooling because he wasn't passing all his classes at college because he was getting burned out and didn't think he wanted to be in that field anymore. And then he topped it all off with something along the lines of, and I have to pick up shifts here because my worthless boss's kid can't be bothered to work their own damn shift. That last part he said a bit louder and looked towards the back like he was wanting to make sure that someone heard it. That was definitely all terrible things to have to deal with, and I did really feel bad for him. But in that exact moment, I had no clue what to do or say other than, "Wow, I'm so sorry." He just stared at me and let out a heavy sigh, saying, "You know what? It's alright. I at least got it off my chest, which helped me more than you know." I just told him that I'm glad I was able to help them and that everything would work out in the end. He then stood up and thanked me and then asked me for my name. Hell, I didn't even live in that state and I probably would never see him again. So I told him honestly what it was. He told me his name was, which I think was something like Mac or Mark, something like that. And then he walked to the back of the kitchen. I had a small moment at that point thinking, well, that was something. And then I went back to my meal, preparing to call my friend when I left to tell them about it. I was just about finished, but I was distracted doing something on my phone when I heard someone from behind me shouting, which startled me. I just heard someone shout, "Shut the fuck up!" And I turned around to see Mark, and who I assumed to be the manager, standing in the kitchen. I assumed they were the manager because they had on a different colored shirt. The manager had his hands up in a manner like he was shrugging, while Mark was throwing his hands angrily. The manager was talking a lot quieter as I could only hear Mark shouting. It's now got the attention of the others in the lobby and the two other workers on the other side of the kitchen. And after a short conversation between the two, I saw Mark grab something to his right, and before I could blink, he swung it at the manager. The next thing I remember was hearing the agonizing screams coming from the manager, while the two workers on the other side are also now yelling at Mark. I quickly got up and ran over to the counter, where I then saw the horrifying scene. Mark was now on top of the manager, swinging this hot fry basket at his face. I was frozen in place. I knew what I needed to do, which was call 911, but I couldn't move. I just stood there horrified by the situation unfolding in front of me. I finally came to my senses when one of the other employees jumped on Mark and was fighting him to get off the manager. I went back to my seat to grab my phone and then I called 911, and thankfully, they were able to get my location because I barely knew where I was. They asked me to stay there so they could talk to me, so I had to stay there even longer to wait for them. A couple other customers had run out the door, while one of them tried helping the manager by applying cold towels to their face and arms. Somehow, he was still conscious or regained consciousness. But his moans of pain, I will never forget. And to this day, they still haunt me. Meanwhile, after the other employees got him off the manager, he ran towards the back and I didn't see him again. I wanted to do something, but I was scared that he may come back out and try to do something again to all of us who were standing there with him. I just stood by the door, hoping to see the cops or an ambulance soon. And after what felt like an eternity, they did finally show up. The cops went in first and immediately went to the back. Then the EMTs came in and started caring for the manager. I then had to tell them everything that I saw, as well as everyone else that was still there. Apparently, there was another exit out back, and Mark had left through it and was long gone. Unfortunately, I wish I could tell you more about this, but that was pretty much it. After all that, I was given permission to leave. I got sick and then called my friend from my car, now shaking and crying. I explained everything to them, and when we couldn't talk anymore, I called my sister and told her. There was no way that I could finish this drive by myself with my own thoughts. I definitely needed a distraction. Thankfully, I only had about 3 hours left to go, which was enough time to get it all out, for me to calm down and then even pull over to take a quick much-needed power nap. I got to my friend's place late that night, and after a few drinks, I crashed. I was thankful that I was with good company after that, because the thoughts and sounds kept circling my mind and definitely made it hard to sleep for a few nights. I have no idea about the condition of the manager or if that Mark guy was ever caught. I just hope that both of them got the right help that they desperately needed. Oh, and if I'm ever on a road trip like that, I only do drive-through now. Hi everyone. I'm a long-time lurker in this group, but I've never posted because I've never really had anything that I thought was worth sharing. I've read a lot of stories on here, and I honestly never thought that I was going to one day make a post. Yet, here we are. Sure, we've had our share of creeps at my work, but this one was above and beyond everything else. This happened only a few weeks ago, so the memory is still fresh in my mind, and honestly, I'm still a bit creeped out about it. I was working the night shift at my McBurgers, and yes, I'm calling it that because I don't want the real restaurant to see this and try to shut me down. And it seemed like a pretty normal night. So to give some context, the McBurgers that I work at isn't in the best part of town. We've had our fair share of weird people and bizarre things happening. But honestly, it kind of feels like people with ill intentions just leave our store alone. It's almost like our McBurger is a safe haven for them, so they know not to do crazy things there. Like, we get the types that kind of look like they're going to commit a robbery, but then they just order a burger and leave. And then, wherever they go afterwards is who they hit. Well, unfortunately on this night, we got a taste of the crazy. It was around 2 a.m. and we were mostly empty. I was manning the drive-through window and doing some sweeping in the back area when we weren't getting any cars. Kevin, one of my coworkers, was manning the front, but due to the lack of traffic, he was doing some cleaning up on the line and other parts. After a bit of this, we heard the door open, and Kevin wrapped up what he was doing to head to the front and then greet the customer. I watched him go up and look around and then come back, saying that there was no one there, and then just shrugging it off. He went back to cleaning, but about 5 minutes later, I looked up and I told him that he had a customer because there was a man standing up at the front. He looked a bit messed up, not dirty or anything, just a bit like he was stressing out. He was wearing a nicer button-down shirt and a decent pair of pants, but they were, for the lack of a better way to put it, messed up? Like, his shirt was halfway unbuttoned, his tie was still tied around his neck, but halfway unknotted. His pants were unbuttoned, but his belt was holding them up, and his hair looked like he had been pulling it out. He looked like a VP for a company or something that has just closed its doors for the last time, if that makes any sense to you. The man just stood there at the counter looking at nothing in particular, like he was just spacing out. Kevin asked if he could take the man's order, and the man just stared at him with that same blank expression. The man just kept his eyes focused on Kevin, not saying a word. And after a few moments of staring, and Kevin trying to get him to say anything, waving his hand in front of his face and looking back at me like, "Is this guy okay?" The guy then screams, "Hey!" straight at Kevin. He jumps and I jump, and we were both now paying full attention to this guy. At this point, our manager Sasha is actually coming out of the office room to see what exactly is going on. And as soon as she does, this man starts screaming at her, yelling that in his words, She was the one with Satan, and that she was an affront to the Holy Father. We both turned to look at her. She had a confused look on her face, and yeah, that was weird. But then, as we weren't paying attention to the guy, he reached forward and grabbed Kevin's shirt and then pulled him close. At this point, I ran up to the front to try and get this guy away from him. I was sitting there trying to push this man off, and he's sitting there staring at Kevin with his whole face shaking, and then starts saying, "They're coming, Kevin. This is the end. This is how all things end." Considering how much he was shaking aggressively, his voice was surprisingly calm and direct. He started pretty much trying to pull Kevin over the counter, and I was struggling to get this guy off of Kevin. Thankfully, Sasha was already in the back and calling the police. As I'm trying to pry the man off of Kevin, he began shouting about how they were here and that we needed to leave. Thankfully, police arrived damn near immediately, and my guess is that they were probably already patrolling and waiting for something to happen. They managed to restrain the man with the two officers and then get his hands in cuffs. As they led him away, he continued to rant about some impending doom. The whole ordeal was over in a matter of minutes, but we were all in a pretty confused state of panic. After the police left, we all tried to get back to work, and when Kevin went to clean the restrooms, he found a weird symbol that was scratched into the wall, and not the stall, but the actual paint on the dry wall. The only way I can describe it is, it's like a summoning circle for the supernatural. Obviously, we have no idea why he carved it into the wall before going psycho on Kevin. But at least, we knew what he was doing between the time that he walked in and we saw him. Obviously, this left us all a bit shaken, but we went back to just doing our mundane jobs until our shifts were over. Kevin did end up putting his 2 weeks in not too long after, and he just had his last shift. He said that he didn't really want to quit, but he keeps getting this weird feeling that the guy is going to come back, and it's bothering him enough to leave. I get it. I don't blame him. It was definitely a terrifying moment. and the fact that this guy paid way more attention to Kevin probably didn't help. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared because your fear feeds me.